So I just got sick and vomited and I'm not feeling good again. Well, like always, I'm taking my Triliptal now, so I should get a little better. But Triliptal won't cure 25 years of seizures and shakes and muscle spasms. And of course, the doctors aren't going to treat the actual physical ailments I have. Thanks to my mother and father's storytelling, they keep on wanting to go back to treating me for fantasies that have never been shown on a machine, proven, and there's no actual real life events for these drugs to be put into my body. I'll give you an example. The doctors put lots of drugs into my body like Thorazine, Seroquel, Trazodone, Lamictal, Risperidone, Ritalin, and I'll give you one of the examples of reasons why. So on my original medical file, I have attachment disorder, I have kleptomania, and I have lying or telling stories. Now, what was that based off? Why is this 7 year old getting this put into his medical file? Why do they think that this is important? Well, because the mother has constantly screamed this for a whole year over and over, saying, I want my child medicated. I want my child medicated. Now, keep in mind that during my whole life at childhood, I was more medicated than prisoners or children that killed their parents with hammers. I was in a treatment center with another kid in the next room over that literally hit his grandmother with a hammer. Now, I've heard of a guy in prison that killed his grandmother with a hammer, but this kid just hit her. She didn't die. He's not in prison. He's in this Lowell treatment center. So he's violent. He's hitting people with hammers and cracking their skulls in. I have never hit anybody with anything. And I have never even taken my fist to my parents. But yet, this kid is on half the medications I'm on. I'm on every single pill this crazy ass kid is on, plus more. Not only that, my mother's trying to get me on the schizophrenic medication Zyprexa that the guy across the hall that talks to himself and hears voices is on. I never heard a voice in my life. Why does my mother want me on more drugs than a schizophrenic serial killer? Why does my mother want so many drugs in my body? And why are the doctors allowing and going around with this? Well, because mental illnesses aren't proven on any machine. So, my mother at the age of 7 is spending a year screaming at the doctor that I have all these disorders, bringing in a swimming medal with her to the doctor's office that has ZG on the back, saying that this is proof that I'm mentally ill. This swimming medal is proof that I'm mentally ill. Now, I should explain, right? How is this going on? Well, let's explain where this swimming medal came from, first of all. So I was in the orphanage before I went to foster care, and they brought all the children into this van. They drove the van to a parking garage. We all, we had our swimming clothes with us. We went to the pool, and we got into the short, not so deep end. They had us practice a couple things like treading water. At the end of the swim lesson, they said, okay, this is the end. We're going to do something here. Whoever treads water the longest will get this prize medal. We only have one, so whoever does it the longest gets the medal. It's just a, cheap like bronze medal, and just a kid's medal type thing. And we have prizes for everybody else, so don't worry. Yeah, that's a thing nowadays. So, we tread water, and I do the best. At this time, I'm doing very well. I'm accomplishing tasks. I come in 5th out of 30 in a spelling bee. Things are pretty normal for me. So they write my name, my initials on the back of the swimming medal. The staff say, good job, Zach, and they put my initials on the back, ZG. At this point, they give me the swimming medal and they say, don't let anybody steal it. They bring us back to the van. Now it's cold outside. When we go in between from the YMCA or whatever that building was, it's a big building, to the parking garage, our hair is cold and I feel like it's going to freeze. But I don't seem to shake or have any of my neurological disorder that I've had since age 7 after the overdose. None of that seems to ever bother me before the overdose. So anyways, We got the my hair being cold. I get back in the van. We get back to St. Anne's Orphanage. I get back to my room, and I have a Lego set, a small Lego box that I won because I was the best kid of the month, and you get a prize to go shopping. So that's how I got the Legos, and that wasn't the same month, but that's how the Lego box was there. And I hid the medal in the Lego box because they told me not to let anybody steal it. So at this point, it stayed in the Lego box, and I went through foster care. Now, I got adopted after an overdose by a crazy older mother that liked pills or giving her children pills as well. She liked popping pills herself, she liked drinking alcohol, and she liked giving her son pills for sure. At this point, she starts giving me lots of pills, showing off how she gives so much pills and how sick her kid is and how many pills she has to give to her kid in front of her friends. Her friends are telling my mother, don't have him take 5 pills dry or 3 pills dry. Don't have him do that. He doesn't look so good. He's losing weight. He's a definitely weight. Maybe you shouldn't be giving him pills dry. No, no, no. I know what I'm doing. I used to be a nurse. I know exactly what I'm doing. Zach, take those pills dry. Well, my mother's friends told her that that could burn my throat. I didn't know anything about this, so I continued doing the meds dry. I thought it would be fine. My mother says it's fine. Eventually, I burned my esophagus, and then I stopped. Even though my mother is like, oh, why'd you stop taking it dry? You can still take it dry. I'm like, no, I can't. That's not good. But, anyways, so she's showing off these meds. I'm now wondering what the hell's happening to my body. Nobody's filling me in. And one day I'm playing with my Legos. And just playing with my Legos, and I come across this swim medal. I look at the swim medal and I say, oh, I should show this to my new mother. She'll be proud of me for winning this. So I take the swim medal to my mother. My mother, I go, look what I won in the orphanage. My mother takes the swim medal, looks at it, and goes, you are so need more meds. You are a liar. You did not win this. Yes, I did. I won in the orphanage. No, it belongs to an African American kid. Even though it obviously doesn't, because I was there winning it. She's just creating fantasies. One of the mental illnesses of my mother is if she comes up with an idea like, I didn't see him win this, then she then builds a fantasy to go along with it. So her first brain thought was, I didn't see him win this because I won in an orphanage. But she also didn't see anybody else win it. So what she did is she built a fantasy that I'm lying about a medal. This must be a stolen medal from an African American kid, which this African American kid never asked for his medal, never said it was his medal, he never won this medal, and they never got him to lie about this medal either. Yet I'm begging and crying for weeks to give me my swimming medal back. You know what happens when you do this to a child? It kills his drive to make accomplishments. You're taking away his accomplishments, punishing him for doing something good, and then you're being racist, and you're getting on him on medications, and establishing lies with doctors because of your own fantasies. That's a dangerous mother right there. But my mother was dangerous, so dangerous, in fact, she went through liver failure, and I'll have to be in pain and suffering for the rest of my life. And my father's still trying to cover this up and wants nobody to know about it. He doesn't want doctors to know about this and put it on my file so I actually can get medical care. He doesn't want to stand by me at the doctor's and say, okay, maybe my wife was doing some crazy shit that I wasn't paying attention to. But I knew nothing about it. I just knew my wife was doing one thing after another that was crazy. Now that Zach goes over it with me, yeah, that might have been bad. Zach might have been overdosed at my feet. Yeah, there was a call to an emergency people, and he was passed out. There was a time where he lost the ability to see out of his eyes and talk. And we did go to we did go to the doctors after this overdose, and Zach did speak up about something that he called an allergy attack, where he lost the ability to see out of his eyes, feel anything out of his hands or feet or body. He wasn't able to stand up, he wasn't able to talk, he was screaming and panicking, scared. And my wife called somebody on the phone. They told her to bring me to the emergency room, and she said they don't know what they're talking about. But my wife says it's just an allergy attack to medications she gave him. That's all she said it was. Well, did you guys look into this more? No. Well, when the school said something was wrong, did you look into it more? No. We moved to Texas. We're not going to spend 5 years looking into an illness. No, we got places to be. We got fun to have. We're not going to spend 5 years on a kid's health. No, we're going to go on a cruise. We're going to go to Texas. We're going to put them in New Mexico, and then we're going to move to Mass. And then we're going to move to Maine. We're going to move all around. We're not going to hold up our lives for this kid to get medical care. So that's the type of attitude that I don't want at the end. But of course, that's usually what I get is people being selfish and greedy after they make a mistake. I see it all the time in society. Somebody hits somebody with a car. They don't want to stop and get that person help and get them to the ambulance. You're driving down the road and you hit somebody. You just want to go on with your day, and a lot of people do. There's a hits and runs every day. People will be drunk. They hit somebody with their car and they run. Why? Because they don't want to deal with that, even when they're sober. There's hit and runs from sober people that aren't even at fault. They just don't want to deal with it, so they leave the guy that died bleeding all cut up from the license plate. Meanwhile, if they just call 911 and get the motherfucker help, then that guy lives a full life. So that way, when that guy dies, you can burn into hell for eternity because you decided to kill a man. Just like my mother and father are deciding every single day to kill somebody. My mother died because of it. She killed herself. Her liver failed. She was popping pills and drinking, but she was doing this to a child too. So I have a lot of health issues that aren't being looked into. I can't even use a shelter. My mother and father hid my disabilities so much that when I go to use a shelter, they tell me I cannot live there until my disabilities are documented on paper, which I've spent 11 years trying to do. So when I go into a shelter and I have a seizure on the floor from a cold shower because the cold causes the neurological disorder to act up, or if I go to sleep and in the morning it takes me an hour or two to get my legs in where I can actually stand up and get moving, if something like that happens, where it happens quite a bit, I'm no longer allowed to live there or stay at that shelter until I have documentation of my disabilities. Thanks to my mother and father hiding and trying to cover up my disabilities, that is a Herculean task. So I get to live in the woods for the rest of my life thanks to my mother and father dying. I am going to definitely have a shorter life thanks to my mother and father, a very, very much shortened life, and most likely I have to spend it living in the woods like a monkey man for the rest of my life. All thanks to my mother's and father's choices. Everybody else gets to use a shelter. Everybody else gets to go to the emergency room for a broken leg and get the cast the first time. Everybody else, when they have a seizure at work, get proper medical care. Me, I don't get any of those things thanks to my mother and father. People who are my level of disabled are on Social Security. I don't get to get Social Security because my father lied, manipulated, and used Social Security to pay for one of his houses. Meanwhile, lying to the Department of Health and Human Services, lying to the program, and lying to me about Social Security illegally. Then I'm having to bail him out of 12 grand in debt because I know how he is. He made a mistake. The state's going after him. The state's going to make him give me that money so I can give that money to the program. And you know what's going to happen? My father's going to blame me because he did that. That's what's going to happen. If I receive 1 penny from my father for something that he did, if my father gave me $1 because he did something wrong, he would blame me because I'm the one getting the dollar. If my father had to go through some court process and the courts told him he has to pay Zach some money, he would blame me, Zach. He's not going to blame himself. He's not going to blame the courts. He's not going to blame the worker. He's not going to blame the fact that he stole Social Security. He's going to blame me. He's going to blame the victim. So I bailed him out, showed him love, showed him that I do care for him as a father. I made an agreement with him, and first chance he had, he bailed out on the agreement. First chance he had, he was remarrying, moving on. First chance he had, he didn't even think about my health. First chance he had, he didn't think about my future, my jobs, my college, my schooling, my education, none of that. He wasn't thinking about my education when we went to Maine, did he? I mean, I have now spent some schooling in Texas, but they moved me to New Mexico where I missed 18 months. Then do we get me into a school right away? Do we start planning to have me catch up? No, he wants to sell some properties and make some money in Maine. Well, I don't blame you, but not at the expense of others. If you want to make money, that's fine. But right now, you have a mess to clean up. Your son is missing almost 3 years of education, and your priority is to sell a house in Maine where there's no schools? And then when you go back to Mass, don't forget it's going to take time to figure out what levels your child's at. And if you're not honest with the teachers about all that missing education, they're going to think your child is slow and they're not going to be able to figure out why he's that, even though really I just got chunks missing and I'm trying to catch up on my own. So there's a bunch of crazy shit going on in my family. My father and mother aren't telling the teachers, aren't. I mean, the last time we had any honesty or close, I shouldn't say honesty, my mother was still lying, but close to the right direction was before we moved to Texas. Teachers and doctors were actually looking into my disabilities before we moved to Texas. Once when we moved to Texas, nobody was helping me with my physical health. When I moved to New Mexico, I had no health care. When I moved to Maine, there was no health care. When we moved to Chelmsford, no neurologist, nothing for the shakes. When I was bumping in the furniture and getting cuts all over my body from bumping in the bed frames, tables, getting my shoulders caught on door frames, my watch is breaking because my wrist keep on hitting into doorknobs. I mean, after 100 hits with a doorknob, eventually your watch breaks. It takes a couple years to line it up perfect, but I get whacked so many times that they always break. So this is going on for years in front of my parents. They call me and I tell them this happens all the time. It's normal for me. You guys have seen me bumping the furniture. You know what my mother does? She tries to get me more pills. She goes, "Oh, that's self-harming when you're bumping in the furniture and you can't control your nervous system and you're having muscle spasms. That's called self-harming and you need more drugs." That's what my mother comes up with. Now, I know that's a complete pile of shit. So I tell her, so I say, "Mom, that's not true." My father can realize, well, that doesn't sound right. So he says, "I don't think you're right about that one." But then my mother says, "No, you're wrong," and then overrules my father. And then goes, "I don't care what you two say. I know this is self-harming. I'm calling the doctor first chance I get." And so then I never get help with the actual illness I have. The neurological disorder, once again, my mother's covering up her crime, my father's buying in the bullshit he knows isn't true, and I'm going without health care. I'm 15 years old, and I'm destined to bump in the furniture and get hurt for the rest of my life because nobody wants to allow me to get any health care. Still to this day, the decisions and the choices and the actions that my mother and father made is what's preventing me from getting Social Security and health care. And because I'm so disabled, it's almost impossible for me to work without getting injured. Every single time I work for a year, I pile up injuries like I'm collecting fucking baseball cards. And it's pissing me the fuck off that I have to sit here getting hurt from other people's choices and actions. Meanwhile, they fucking go, "I don't know, is it true? I saw Zach fall. I saw your wife make up stories. You know what? I heard your wife say that giving drugs to children is okay, even extra medications as punishments." Well, also, we did speak to this about the doctor, and Zach did say at the doctor's at age 7 that Patricia gave him meds and he lost his vision. And then Patricia did cut off all medical care, and then she did pass away of liver failure. And yes, Zach did get abused in New Mexico. And yes, we did move to like 5 different states. And oh yeah, she did act crazy in front of us. Oh yeah, and her own grandson was afraid of her. Oh yeah, and all sons and daughters that ever met her said that she was a lunatic. Oh, wait a minute. This is obvious. My mother was fucking nuts and hurt an orphan that she adopted. This doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. My mother gave me multiple over one big overdose and then a bunch of extra drugs I shouldn't have had, refused to allow me to get medical care when the doctors were looking into it, and moved me around so much, and I'm missing 4 years of education thanks to their choices. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out my mother was a big fucking danger and did a lot of damage to my body. But my father wants to run into the sunset, leaving this for me to clean up or I die. Well, guess what? The dying part is what happens. I don't drive. I can't walk properly most of the year in the cold. I can't use my body properly. I get muscle spasms. I can't always talk properly. My nervous system is shit. I got new injuries being occurred because I'm trying to force it. I'm trying to force my body to do things. I'm trying to force through my disability, so I'm getting seizures and injuries on the side of the road. There's no way I'm able to clean up 15 years and over $100,000 worth of bullshit. No way. Not with the tools I have available, and not with my father still willing to cover up his crimes. Because no matter how many steps I make forward, let's say I make 3 steps forward on getting health care, my father will make a couple phone calls moving me 2 steps back. And every single 3 steps I make take 5 years and a lot of blood, sweat, bleeding, stitches, scars, seizures, and more injuries. And the more injuries I get, the more seizures I have, the more brain damage I receive during these seizures, because during the seizures my head whacks on the cement so severe it gets fractures and lots of damage. Also, sometimes during these seizures my head hits tables and things like that. So every time these continue to happen, it's harder and harder to get even wipe my own ass and cook my own breakfast. So if I'm having more and more trouble cooking my own breakfast due to head injuries, then I can better believe it's harder to be running around the country like Superman cleaning up my father's and mother's mess and spending all my money. I don't get to have a life. I don't get to study anything I want to. I don't get to have friends. I don't get to have girlfriends. I don't get to go out for fun. All my days off are spent with doctors, emergency rooms, or trying to get money to make sure I can get better. Every single day I live is another day where I'm trying to get better. But in the last 25 years, I still do not have a single piece of paper on my file that has given me an explanation of what's going on. If I went into a shelter today, they would throw my ass out the minute I couldn't move until I got paperwork like that. And when I come back, they'll say, well, why isn't your disability documented? And then I explain all this, how my mother and father wanted to hide it. They didn't want me getting health care. My mother didn't want to get in trouble. She didn't want the doctors in Westford, Massachusetts to continue. She didn't want to continue any of that. She wanted to cover it up with ballet, moving me to New Mexico, moving me to Texas, moving me to Maine, moving me to Mass. She tried to brainwash me. She continued to use weird rhetoric. She continued to stifle and hurt her son as much as she possibly could before she died from popping drugs and alcohol, which my father also covered up. Yes, she went through liver failure, that's on the paperwork, but the fact that while she was on liver failure and only 20% of her liver was working, they let her come home for only less than like 12 hours, and she was drinking, and then the next day she got brought back to the emergency room and she had alcohol in her system. All that was covered up, and my father did not want it anything to do with it. They wanted her to get a new liver. They wanted to put her on the top of the liver transplant list. She used to be a nurse 20 years prior to that. My father is very wealthy. They're willing to pay a lot of money, so they're trying to get put on the top of the list. So they left the fact that she's drinking while her liver is failing off the paperwork. They also left the pill popping off the paperwork. And my father prevented me from visiting her the whole time she was sick. I was not allowed. I wanted to visit her. I was crying to visit my mother. But no matter who I called or what I did, my father was there to make sure I wouldn't be there. I even called Dan, a friend of the family who drove me around. He said, talk to my father. He's not able to drive me because of my father. Talk to my father about driving me to my mother in the hospital. I asked my father over and over. He says, no, you're not going to visit your mother. No, you're not going to visit your dying mother. No, you're not going to visit your dying mother. I don't want you visiting your dying mother. I don't want you visiting your dying mother. You're not allowed to visit your mother. You're not allowed to visit your mother. I don't care. You're not allowed to visit your mother. No, you're not allowed to visit your mother. Nope, you're not allowed to visit your dying mother. No, 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 no. So I wasn't allowed to visit her as she was dying. She did come home, like I said, for that 1 12-hour period with 20% of her liver working, a light yellow tint to her body. But all she did was blow past her family, go to the liquor cabinet, drink some alcohol, and then go straight to bed. Then the next morning she was back in the emergency room. She didn't even talk to her family. She didn't say hi. She didn't even give me like a hug. She didn't care about her family. All she cared about was that liquor cabinet. You know this because it was the first thing she did. She went straight. She couldn't stop thinking about that liquor cabinet in the hospital. That's the real reason she wanted to go home. That's the real reason why. If it was her family, then when she came in the door, she would have saw her family. If she was thinking about her family, her sons, stuff like that in the hospital, and that's why she wanted to come home, then the first thing you would think to do is be with your family. But she doesn't want anything to do with her son. She doesn't want anything to do with the family. She just wants to drink and have her husband near her. That's it. Well, she had the same thing in the hospital. She had her husband there. She just didn't have any alcohol. So she leaves with 20% of her liver, yellow tint, to come home and drink. She drinks. Next morning, she's worse, so she goes back to the emergency room. I'm still not allowed to visit. The doctors now see the alcohol, I'm sure, in her system. But again, my father and her are trying to make sure they get put on the top of the liver transplant list. So they're trying to keep all that out of her information. What's fine if she's going to stop drinking when she gets the transplant. Would I want my mother to get the transplant? I wanted her to get it, but not at the expense of a child or another person who actually could use that chance. If you're going to go straight to drinking as soon as you get the transplant, you don't deserve a transplant. That's that simple. Just like I can't get a transplant. If my kidneys fail, I don't get a transplant. Why? Because I have hepatitis. My mother gave me medications that have the side effect of suicidal thoughts. And I told my mother about after this at about 9, 10 o'clock at night that I took a couple aspirin because I had suicidal thoughts right after taking these medications my mother forced me to take. And instead of looking through the side effects and looking into this as a bigger, looking at it as actual information, they establish an actual disorder and start brainwashing and confusing me. As an adult, I live in the woods, and they keep on bringing me to an emergency room for dying. They find me frozen to death. They bring me back to life. They found me not breathing. They bring me back to life. They find me with a head injury rod. They bring me back to life. They find me with a seizure. They bring me back to life. They found me falling with a head injury. Bring me back to life. They keep on bringing me back to life, and now I'm walking into a place to sleep in negative 10 degrees, about to freeze to death. I mean, it's 0, negative 10 most of these nights. We even had a negative 20 one time, but they wouldn't let anybody sleep outside. Everybody had to go into these places. Anyway, so I'm probably going to die tonight. There's a good chance I'm committing suicide against my will because literally when I go to the shelter, I'm not allowed because of my disability. When I go at Dunkin's, I have to spend money. I don't have any money. I've gone to every place I possibly can. I either can go to jail for trespassing, or I can go here and take my chances with living for the night. So, of course, I'm very suicidal, not because I want to be, because society is forcing me into dangerous situations against my will. I've gone to the shelter, I've gone to every place out of this dangerous 0 degree, but yet they tell me to sleep in 0 degrees. I know that could be the death of me. I have no choice. So instead, I cut my skin and I go into the emergency room and they let me not die for the night. So whenever it dropped below 0, I needed to find a reason not to die. And so they used to call me suicidal even though I want to live. Because if I go outside of the emergency room, I'm going to die. I literally am going to die. It's 0 degrees. The shelter won't take me. I can't go anywhere. And the only place I can sleep is outside in 0 degrees without proper clothing. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. You can't do that. That's suicide. Trying to sleep in 0 degrees without proper clothing all night on a bench or in the woods, that's suicide. You're going to die. It's a horrible, painful death. Trust me, they brought me back to life from it. They've found me dead several times like that and had to bring me back to life. I know exactly how painful it is to freeze to death, but you go unconscious. First, you feel a lot of pain. You start having seizures. You shake. You come back to consciousness. You go out. It's terrible. You get head injuries. It's the whole works. But eventually, you pass out for good. And then you don't wake up to 2 days later after they bring you back to life. But it's a terrible way to die. Then I don't want to go out and commit suicide. So I'm trying to get all the doctors to listen to me. And I say, hey, I'm not suicidal, but if you put me outside, I will be suicidal. because living out there will kill me. And if I'm going to die, of course I'm going to be suicidal. I'm dying. I'm going to die. Everybody knows that. There, people are coming up and saying, if you try to sleep out here, you'll die. Go to the shelter. I go to the shelter. They won't take me because my disabilities aren't documented. And they just think it's all some mental illness because I don't have paperwork on it. But I would have paperwork if my mother and father didn't commit so many crimes. Like, for instance, if we stayed in Westford and the doctors were allowed to continue their work, I would still have a diagnosis today. If the teachers were allowed to continue their work with me, I would still have a diagnosis today. If we didn't drop all medical care in Texas, if we tried to have me go see a neurologist, if my mother allowed me to talk about this overdose and my problems with moving, if my mother wasn't lying about me bumping into stuff, if my mother wasn't making up stories and all these mental illnesses to try to get attention and Social Security, if those things weren't going on, I would still have a diagnosis for my nervous system today. But thanks to my mother's and father's choices, I do not get a diagnosis, and it might take me another 10 years to get. That's if I survive and get to live. Most likely, I don't get to live in this society. Most likely, I'm going to be thrown off the grid again to live in the woods. When the temperature reaches zero, I'll start freezing to death again. I'll go to the shelter. They'll keep me for a week, and then when they see my disabilities, throw me out. I'll be going to the doctors trying to get my disabilities established, but it won't be good enough for anybody because there's 10 years of work to do thanks to my mother's and father's choices and actions. So I'll be living in the woods and I will die. This is most likely the future for me. I hope not, I pray not, but we have to use our logical brains to figure out what is going to happen. If you have an eviction notice and you haven't paid your rent, there's a very good chance you're getting evicted. That's just common knowledge. You shouldn't fool yourself. You need to take all the facts into account. But you also need to take into account the good facts, like there is a chance that this could work out well, but only if I am somehow allowed to be treated with my human rights and my civil rights. And if maybe I get those, then things go well. If I get my Social Security, which I have every right to at this point, that would help. If the courts use the video footage and press charges against the people and actually look at the mold and the damage of this apartment and the damage to my roommate's body and my body and other people's body, and then they actually give us a settlement or something like that, that could help, but that's a year out. If my family got involved, tried to take responsibility for their actions and did one of 100 things that could help, like, well, most of all, tell the truth about what was going on with your second wife. That would be helpful. Uh, Maybe allow me to get Social Security. I mean, if that requires an address and a phone, seeing as you fucked up a deal that you made with me, I mean, my father really kept his end of the bargain. You're going to have to make sure I keep a mailing address and a phone line while I apply for Social Security. I'll probably need a Social Security attorney, and we're going to need to get all those records that have to do with my neurological disorder that my mother was trying to bury. Now, they are easy to find. They're from before we moved to Texas, and I'm building up more records now. So we have a pile of records from the last 11 years, and we have some records in childhood that were buried by my mother. Now, if my father could just tell me the names of those doctors or the places he brought me in Westford, that would help. But I also am going to need to receive that, and I'm not supposed to be working in this condition, but I should work right after I get Social Security. I mean, I'm going to need that extra income. I won't be able to, I mean, if I get injured like I am now, I'll have to go to the doctors and emergency room and leave work, what isn't an option as is. If I went to work without Social Security and I got injured, I have to go right back to work while injured. I mean, literally, I was bleeding internally into my testicles, and I didn't get a day off. I got to go to the emergency room, go to the doctor, and then go back to work. Or I live in the woods, get evicted, and lose my job. That's how it works when I'm not on Social Security. But when I'm on Social Security, I get to make sure my hours are not taking up my doctors. My boss cannot control my doctors. Now, without Social Security, my boss wants me to cancel a doctor or I'm fired. I have to go in and cancel my doctor. They've done this to me before. I'll have an appointment with a doctor I waited 6 months for. Somebody will call out and they'll say, because of something, 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 you have to show up. I'll say, it's not my shift. They'll say, yeah, Zach, well, we're holding you accountable, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but it's not my shift. I did all my shifts. And they always play this bullshit. You know why? Because I'm responsible. But they threaten to lose my job. I cannot trade my job for one doctor's appointment. If I do that now, I'm out living in the woods without a shelter, without ability to stay alive. But if I had Social Security, then I can tell my boss, well, then fire me. I'm sorry, I'll find another job. But I've been waiting 4 months, 6 months for this doctor. I put it on your calendar. You knew I had a doctor's appointment today. I've been waiting 6 months for this doctor. I'll go to the doctor, then I'll give you a call. If you still need me, we'll talk. But we could still balance a schedule with Social Security, and I can put my doctors first then. But as it is right now, all I can do is injure myself for money. That's the only option. That's all I got. No cash benefits, no Social Security. If I work, I get injured. If I try to use a shelter, I will not be allowed until I have my full disability diagnosed. And even if I try to use the shelter up here, they close down most of the year. And my disability is affected by 50 degrees. So most of the year, it is too dangerous for me. And they don't even have a shelter available at those times. So no matter what, I'm just looking at death, 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 death. Maybe the courts help me, but I doubt it. Maybe my family does the right thing, but it's a 50, no, it's less than 50-50. From what I've seen in the last 25 years with this neurological disorder, they didn't help when I was bumping in the furniture. They didn't help when I was having an overdose at their feet. They didn't help when a black man was strangling me. Even after they were awarded money because a black man strangled me, they still didn't help. When I needed an education because I was missing 3 years, they still didn't help. He was selling his properties. When my mother was smacking me around and drugging me, and I was trying to figure out what was wrong, they still didn't help. When my mother was acting unstable in front of my father didn't help. My mother's lies didn't help. Her storytelling didn't help. Taking away my accomplishments and twisting my mind in the circles, like telling me that I'm a bad boy because I won a swimming medal and I did good and I came the first in the class, doing shit like that didn't help. Giving me massive amounts of drugs so it's hard for me to even function every morning, that didn't help. Screaming at me like a lunatic, moving me around, and then trying to control my health care while I live in a program and you guys aren't spending any time to even get to know me, that didn't help. Not being able to drive and being disabled in the way I am and having my father cheat the Social Security system and cheat me didn't help. So when I think about them right now, trying to make up for those losses and trying to at least just clean up their mess, fuck my mess, fuck some of these new injuries like my hepatitis or something like that. How about the ones that have been going on for 25 years that my mother is responsible for? How about you help with those? Seeing as your wife is responsible for 25 years of suffering, and she continued these behaviors over and over and over and over in front of you. So you've seen these things over. She even admitted, my mother admitted to my father that she thought it was okay to give extra medication as a punishment. She said this right in front of my father, right in front of my sister, right in front of my sister's husband, right in front of me. So we know that my mother was doing crazy things. Why don't you try to handle those? Why don't you try to handle the Social Security situation? Seeing as you're responsible for crashing that, why don't you try to uncrash your car? You've crashed a car on the side of the road and you're waiting for somebody else to tow it away. Why don't you go call the tow company and come get your crashed car? If you're going to crash somebody's Social Security, like a crashed car, the least you can do is pick up your mess. Pick up your goddamn mess before you leave. That's all. Just clean up your mess before you leave. If you're going to crash a car into a building, at least call the authorities and make sure your mess is cleaned up. Don't leave it for everybody to guess what the fuck happened. Because that's what I see keep on happening with my father. He leaves it for me to figure out, like a big puzzle. Okay, I crashed this car called Social Security. Now you figure out how to uncrash it.